Welcome to The Wealthy Healthy, the podcast and blog dedicated to inspiring better mental, physical, and financial health. I am your host, Ricky Newton, and on this month's Talk Tuesday guest episode, we have an awesome guest in my friend Victoria Hendrickson. She's somebody I consider one of the more impressive people that I've ever had the pleasure of getting to know. Victoria is a senior consultant at a consulting firm called Org Vitality, and her background is in organizational psychology. She's received her bachelor's in social psychology, as well as a master's and PhD from the California School of Professional Psychology. She's also an avid runner and traveler. Honestly, she's one of those people that you would nominate for like a Forbes 30 under 30 list. So today, she's going to be bringing us a really unique perspective on higher education, women in male-dominated workplaces, and if we have the time, hopefully we'll be able to get to talking about time management, training for marathons, all around the world and more. So it's going to be awesome. But of course, want to welcome to the show, Victoria. How's it going?
Good. Thanks, Ricky. That was very kind and generous of you. Excited to be here.
Awesome. And we are recording this on New Year's Eve. So it's sort of timely too that we're thinking about things that are sort of relevant to like resolutions and things like that. I think it's going to be a good time to have this conversation. So I did want to jump in just by asking something that I would like to know the answer to myself. What got you started on the path to pursuing 3 degrees over the span of about 7 or 8 years? Because this is something that not a lot of people do. I personally didn't and wouldn't want to do that, but you took it in stride. So what motivated that drive?
Mm-hmm. I did just kind of jump right in. I have to say, when I started my bachelor's degree, I don't think I knew where I was headed immediately. I knew I was interested in psychology, so from day one, I did have that psychology, specifically a social psychology concentration. And then I think it was probably the middle of my sophomore or junior year that a professor took me aside and asked me what my future plans were. He was pretty upfront about saying that I seemed really smart, seemed good at what we were doing, and if I was going to go to grad school, I should start thinking about it and start planning right then. I probably knew that grad school was going to happen at some point with a psych undergrad. There's not a whole lot of psych-specific things you can do with a psych undergrad degree. So at that point, grad school was a really nebulous idea, but him pulling me aside and saying that sort of lit a fire to get going. And so that got me going on doing some research, starting to look into grad schools and generally prepare. And then once I had an idea of what I wanted to do, I was sort of on my way. It has been kind of a logical, linear path, and it's been quick, but that doesn't mean it was easy the whole way.
Yeah, for sure. And I know we're going to get into that. You did kind of bring up an interesting point. I think a lot of people study psychology and may or may not necessarily know whether they want to get into psychology as a career. I mean, I studied psychology. I did biological psychology and ended up in tech sales, and I thought originally that I might go to law school. So there's a lot of paths that you can take with it, but it is sort of non-specific unless you really want to go into psychology, in which case grad school sort of is the logical step. So, so you had the encouragement of a professor, but other than that, I mean, did you have some thought? Because psychology is also fairly broad. Like there's social psychology, which you were studying, and then organizational psychology, where you ended up, and all other forms, psychiatrics, and tons of different things that you could kind of do starting in psychology. How did you pick the route that you went?
And first, I want to say a little bit about what organizational psychology is. Not everyone is as familiar with it.
Yeah, please.
And sometimes people think that it means I work with hoarders and I help people organize things as a psychologist. And I have to say first, that's not what I do. It would drive me crazy. Organizational psychology is psychology within organizations. So broadly, what that means is that I work with organizations, not people. Of course, organizations are made up of people, so there are some blurred lines there, but generally my goals are to help leadership make the organization a better place to work. So the way I got there was probably after this professor kind of prodded me a little bit, and I had to start thinking about, one, what was I going to do with the rest of my college experience? I still had a year and a half left, and I'd been doing well so far, but I didn't have like a really specific intentional path. And so I needed to use the rest of that time to be a little more intentional. And then kind of where did I want to focus in grad school? And so I talked to some different people. I talked to different professors. And I came upon noticing that, while the underpinnings of psychology, sort of the differences in human behavior, were really interesting, I didn't want to be a clinical psychologist.
Right.
And that's what most people think about. I didn't want to be a therapist. I think that's really important work, but I could not detach myself from that. And essentially, I would have a really hard time talking to troubled people all day.
Right. I think most people would. That's a hard job.
And so there's a movement right now called positive psychology, which is working with healthy people to help them be even healthier and thrive, or essentially to help normal people reach their goals and do even better. And so I started learning a little bit about that. And then within that, I learned about organizational psychology. And what I loved about organizational psychology is it really brought together a lot of the pieces of my background that I liked. I'm really good at stats, and that's a big piece of organizational psychology, because when we're looking at organizations, we're not just looking at individual people, but we're looking at a lot of data. It brought together a lot of cross-cultural psychology, because when we think about organizations, they are cross-cultures. Our organizations are becoming more global and complex than ever before. And then it just kind of felt right with a lot of the social psychology background I already had. So I started by taking an undergrad class that went really well. I did some research with a professor that is now a really significant mentor to me. And it just felt right, came together, and I don't think I really looked back since then.
Awesome. Cool. One thing that you might have looked back on, though, was student loan debt, because obviously with 3 degrees, and there's no way to get through that. I mean, even if you had tons of help from your parents, unless you just came from a considerably wealthy family, that you're not getting out of that unscathed. So just obviously in the spirit of the show, we're not going to focus too much on finances in today's episode, obviously, but I would love to hear a little bit about, approximately how much debt did that put you in, and what was the timeline? What is the timeline for getting that knocked out, just at kind of at its current pace?
Yeah, so I'll start by throwing the number out there. I graduated with about $85,000 of debt. I was fortunate enough to get some scholarships along the way and some help along the way. I'll also say that I worked full-time my entire graduate school career and part-time during undergrad. So I did chip away at that as I went, which I would strongly encourage anyone to do. It helps you graduate with a smaller number, and 2, it minimizes the interest a little bit. But I am proud to say I'm down to about 72 already. Nice. So it'll probably take me another 7 to 10 years to finish that out.
Awesome. Cool. Very cool. Now, I think the main thing that we wanted to talk about today, now that I think that's a perfect groundwork. Now that we've kind of got that in place, the main thing to focus on today, I think, is to talk a little bit about your experiences and thoughts and perspective around being a woman in a workplace that's largely male, right? I mean, the consultancy space is any female in that particular career path might be one of the only females in her given department or company. So I know that as a result, I mean, again, by no exaggeration, you might literally be one of the youngest females doing what you're doing. So I think those 2 things together, being young and being female, it's probably led to a couple of interesting experiences, to say the least. So just in your, I keep saying the word experience, but in your experience, what have been some of the kind of glaring pros and cons and advantages and disadvantages? I mean, how has that sort of shaped your day-to-day and kind of your career path and everything like that? I mean, in the sense of being a woman who's pursuing a, quote, male career, I mean, what's that been like?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'll start by saying it's constantly changing for me and how I view this and think about it. It's sort of evolving, and I think each week a little bit better at articulating it. I'll start by saying a year ago, my boss asked me if I ever felt that I didn't have opportunities or sort of stymied as a woman in general or in our field. And at the time, I kind of said, no, not really. Maybe people say different kinds of things to me, but that in general, I was able to get where I wanted to be. And I think that's still true, but over the last year, I've had a lot more experiences that I have reflected on and realized are because I'm a woman in this space, that doing the kind of work I do with the kind of leadership I work with is pretty limited for women, and especially women of my age, as you said. So, okay, I think your first question was kind of pros and cons of being a woman in a male kind of field. Unfortunately, I'm going to start with the cons because they're a little more glaring and resonate with me a little more, and that's that people don't take you very seriously. I've been mistaken for somebody's assistant. I've been sort of told to sit in the back where my boss can kind of come up and sit in the front, and there's this awkward moment of like, no, she's part of this. She's going to deliver half the presentation. And then when I'm actually working with people, I feel like I constantly have to prove myself. Yeah. And I'm sure sometimes that's true, and sometimes it's not, but I've experienced it so many times that I believe it to always be true, that I really have to prove myself. Right. And so in that, I would say part of the advantage is that gives me a challenge, and I am always on my toes. I'm someone who's really goal-oriented. I'm pretty type A, and I lean into intensity. I would really always rather have a challenge than to be complacent, and I think knowing that I'm walking into a room that is probably going to be mostly male, that I will definitely be the youngest person in there, I know I have to bring my A game, and I have to prep and be ready, and ultimately I like to think my work is better because of that. It's not better because I'm a woman, it's better because I take a different approach to preparing, and I want to have every T crossed and I dotted before I walk in there.
Awesome. I'm curious now, how often does, I don't know if you could necessarily call it like discrimination, but I mean, it is a form of discrimination. How often would you say that actually comes from other women? I mean, is that something does that happen? Like, I would imagine that it would. So
it does.
How frequently? I mean, is it like, per, like as a ratio or per capita or whatever, however you want to phrase it, like, does it come just as often from other women in the space as well, that there's sort of these limiting beliefs, or, what's your take on that?
I would say it's different. It's less, it's much more passive when it's coming from women. But I have definitely experienced, whether it's kind of a cattiness or discrimination from women, and I will say it's particularly from, in my experience, which is, we're talking about an N of 1, which any statistician would say, that's very limited, but that's what we're doing today. Sorry.
Size of 1.
Yeah, I said I was a data geek,
okay.
so that was going to come out. It's from older women, mostly, who I think have gone through a lot more than I have in their career and have had to break through walls and ceilings that I have not yet encountered. And I get that. I get that they have a lot of experience and sort of got where they got by fighting, and then I come in as this really young PhD who thinks she has all the answers, who's going to tell not only her but also her boss what they should do with their company.
Well, that's how they see it, right?
Yeah. Well, right.
I mean, that's also kind of the business relationship, but that's definitely
It is, and so that's an awkward place to be. Yeah. And I haven't figured out a good way to quite address that yet, but I've definitely come across that a few times.
Interesting. Very interesting for sure. That doesn't surprise me. I think it makes sense. I mean, it's sort of weird. Do you think that that's something that is that institutional, or is that kind of the product of the experiences that those maybe older women have had, or?
Yeah, I think it's more of the context they're sitting in. So I'll say the times when this has happened the most are in more male-dominated industries like financial services. Yeah. It does not happen in tech. I will say I feel a lot more supported in tech organizations where leadership is younger and a little more diverse. Yeah. But in areas where these women probably had to fight really hard to get where they are.
And we're talking 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah,
they
and
were
being
the
the
upstart.
only woman in the room.
Right.
You know, I'm very weird. Like, my experience is very weird to them.
Yeah.
And it's hard. I also think they're not used to working with women, with other women and with younger women. And so they don't make a space in the same way. So, it's a weird experience. I think you asked a little bit about the ratio of how often does that happen. I would say that happens less often than discrimination or weirdness from men.
Yeah.
But it's noted, and I guess it's a little less expected from other women. You kind of expect the other women to be supportive of each other, or at least neutral. You expect something to be neutral.
Right.
And so it stands out in a different way.
Right. And maybe they're not necessarily even meaning to. It's just, again, something that's sort of they're used to and ingrained, and
if
they don't
it's
know
become
how it's
normalized to them, then that's different.
So on the subject of like the men's side of things, you and I have kind of an ongoing joke. It's like a bit where something simple will come up and I will express my need to mansplain it to you because your woman brain can't process it alone. I bring this up during the podcast because one of my favorite things about you is that you can have a sense of, like, you take this seriously, but you can have a good sense of humor about it, and you know the difference between when it's satire and when it's not. But the scary thing, and the reason I bring it up, is because it is a satire. Like, the reason that it's funny is because we're not poking fun at you or at women. Quite obviously, we're poking fun at the fact that, like, that's a real thing that other people do and say, and the way that people actually think or behave. So the joke wouldn't exist if it never happened in real life. I know that you've come across some of this type of treatment in reality in some big and small ways. What are the most common ones? What are the most maybe startling ones? And how have you dealt with it? Have you gotten better at dealing with it over time? I mean,
yeah. This is huge. And I think you and I do joke about this a lot because I think we're coming from a similar perspective. Is it is a little ridiculous that people still think about women in such a way these days, but it does happen. It's true, and so sometimes it's easier to joke about it than to talk about it. So earlier I said that maybe a year ago I thought I didn't receive a lot of different treatment as a woman, but maybe this year I do. And I'll first say that some of the experiences I'm going to talk about happened more over this last year as I've been taking on more responsibility and kind of going out on my own a little more in my work. And I think that's for two reasons. One is I just physically appear in more places without the rest of the team or without my boss with me. And two, when I do that, I am in more of a leadership or expert role, which makes people notice that, ooh, she's really young and she's the only one standing up there. Like, that's different.
Right.
So I think that's why there's been more of it this year. And frankly, if I need to be honest with myself, why more will happen next year and the year after that. Now, if I start with your question of what are the most common ways this happens, I would say it's the passive-aggressive comments from men that I think as a woman, supposed to laugh at. And sometimes it's really hard to notice that it's happening in the moment, and I notice it later or realize, like, that wasn't funny. That was really sexist. So one example is this year I spoke at a law enforcement conference, and I was really excited about this. And I have to say I did a really awesome job. It was probably my best kind of speech or presentation to date. That's something that's really hard for me. And so I was stoked that I did an awesome job. And a lot of people were really supportive. And one person that came up to me after, who I'll say is also a PhD who knows a lot about psychology and all kinds of dynamics, told me that my glasses give me an extra 20 IQ points. And I think in the moment I just kind of laughed and sort of walked away. But, 20 IQ points is a lot. And I think that's why you're laughing. So the difference
120 to 140 is like from really smart to super genius.
Or from 100, which is average, down 20 points is Down syndrome.
Yeah.
So this guy either thinks that I'm normal, but without my glasses, I have, serious mental challenges, or he thinks that I'm a genius because I'm wearing my glasses. Anyway, it's a little ridiculous.
Right.
You know, there's nothing in those words is extremely offensive.
But it's not a compliment.
But it's not a compliment. No. It's not something he would say to someone twice my age, and it's not something he would say to a man.
Right. Can you imagine? If he said it to a dude.
Ricky, those glasses.
Yeah. Those glasses give you 20 IQ points and 3 hotness points, actually.
Right.
I want to...
He wouldn't say that to a colleague of his. I think other things I get were, you know, I've been told, like, oh, she's not just a pretty face, which, again, I'm supposed to say thank you. Like, oh, you realized I'm smart. You thought I was just pretty.
Right.
Ooh.
Thank
lucky
you so
me.
Right. I know, yeah.
And another one is people comment on what I eat a lot. And I think that's another thing that's probably more noticeable for women because there's enough kind of stigma and attention on what women are eating. But at least 3 or 4 times a client has noticed that I'm eating more than a salad, God forbid.
Right. Ignoring that you run a lot, which we'll talk about, but...
Well, as if that mattered.
I know. Well, true.
As a young woman, I guess I should be more concerned about what my weight is, and I should eat a green salad with a little bit of vinaigrette on top, and that's probably it. So whenever I eat like a sandwich or fries or... frighteningly, I remember what I was eating each time someone's done this, and I hate that I remember that. But they have to comment on that. And again, they wouldn't comment on that to a colleague of theirs or to someone older, but they just feel it's very normal. Oh, and people try to guess how old I am all the time.
Yeah. What do you usually get?
Well, they
undershoot
can't.
or
no,
because they're like, well,
they
PhD, so 22. You had to be at least this old.
Exactly.
They'll do that math.
That's what they do.
3-year program. You have a master. Okay, so that's at least 1 or 2 years.
Exactly. They try to do the math backwards because they know they're not supposed to ask me how old I am, and so they say something like PhD. And how long have you been out of that? And where did you work after that? And for how many years?
Right. Right.
And how many years?
And then until they do the arithmetic.
You can almost see them there with their little napkin writing down and. It's like how at what point do I look them in the eye and say I'm 27 if you care and you were fine with the job I just did, so does it matter?
Right.
To call them out a little bit versus when do you just answer? So I think part of your question was how do you deal with it? And I haven't gotten very good at dealing with those kinds of instances yet because it's hard to know in the moment, are they literally just asking where I went to school or asking if my food was good because they're going to get the same thing next week.
Right.
Like you kind of don't know until it's happened. So I think I'm still working on that part.
Yeah.
You asked for some of the more outrageous and egregious things that have happened, and those are a little more clear. So, when someone offers to give me and my business, or me and my firm some business, and to quote unquote make me look good in front of the company in exchange for sex, that's very obvious, and I really don't think that they would offer that to men, and that would be very inappropriate if they did.
Right? Yeah,
that's inappropriate for anyone.
It doesn't matter. Yeah, it totally doesn't matter.
That's always inappropriate. But I think I'm in a unique position receiving those kinds of comments or offers or whatever you want to call them.
Yeah. Steve made a face. He's like
Steve didn't see that one coming. Well, that's the kind of thing that people just assume doesn't happen anymore.
Right.
Much less in a room full of people, including my boss and his boss and 40 other people. But it does. And it's not like it was thinly veiled innuendo that I had to guess later. It was very blatant and
come on to my hotel room.
Explicit. And humiliating. And that's probably like my worst professional moment ever.
But I mean, how do you get good at dealing with that? You know what I mean? Like you have to maintain some professionalism still, even though they're not. You can't just blow up on them, but you have to check it too.
Right. And I think so in that instance and in instances when people have been really, really forward and there's just no question about what's happening, I start by de-escalating it and trying to change the conversation. And then, once this dude put his hands on me, it was just very apparent that he didn't understand what no meant. And I just got up and I started walking elsewhere to honestly find the first coworker I could find and grab them and stick with them for the rest of the evening. Right. And that's not... that saved me in that moment, but would that keep him from doing that to someone else or really send the message?
Have to do that, right? Like,
yeah,
you shouldn't have to.
It does.
That scenario shouldn't have to occur anyway, that you have to sort of be saved in air quotes, but like.
No, and I hated that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I also don't like that I feel like I'm in this position where I constantly have to decide, okay, is this going to be a passive-aggressive thing that I can just laugh off and then tell someone about it later? Or is this going to escalate like this other guy did where I need to walk away before I'm not safe? Like, I don't like that I have to think those thoughts and kind of make that decision.
Especially in a professional environment. Like anywhere for sure, but especially in a professional
Right. I want to be doing my professional thing and be, in this case, it was networking or, I'm at a company event, just working. And so to always have that running in the back of your mind is really stressful and it's difficult. And I think women don't talk about it enough. So, that's one reason why I don't quite know what to do, and I don't really have a blueprint for how I deal with it because I haven't heard other people talk about how they deal with it. I think once I told a lot of my friends about this, they were super appalled and somewhere between like incredulous, but also, oh yeah, I could see that happening. There was no one that said, no way, like, that doesn't happen.
The most unbelievable thing I've ever heard.
They just kind of, that's terrible, but yep, that happens. Yeah. And, I don't know how other people deal with it. My way was to walk away and talk to other people like that I knew well. And I'm lucky enough that sort of the men I work with closely and other men in my life are extremely supportive. Right. So I'm confident enough to do that.
Yeah.
And
then they work with you on a day-to-day, so they probably know, like, even if they had any kind of sort of predisposition right when you started, like now that it's been a few years, like they definitely know that you deserve to be there. Like there's no question for them as well, right? So I think that's probably part of it, that like, it shouldn't exist, but it is one of those things that could be another thing that has to be overcome, is that like it might take a lot of more time for you as a woman, just because you're young and because you're a woman, than it would another man who comes in. If a young guy came in with the PhD, like, he'd be discriminated for being young, but it would probably end there. Right?
Yeah, but then he'll get older.
Right. I mean,
I'll get older too,
right.
But that's only halfway, right?
Yeah, for sure. So obviously we're talking about a lot of these kind of disadvantages and cons, and you touched a little bit on some of the advantages, like keeping you on your toes and stuff, but surely there's got to be some perks and strengths. Like I work in tech sales, pretty male-dominated, a little less so probably now than it used to be. Like you mentioned yourself, tech in general is a little more female-dominated. My company has a female CEO and a female VP of sales, and my manager's I know, it is. It's awesome. I want to see more of that. Of the 5 managers that I've had working in sales, 4 of them have been female. So I've seen my manager do things like pull the woman card to score a meeting with an exec, women in leadership, solidarity kind of thing. I've seen it external and internal meetings. I've seen it. It seems like having female leadership in the room kind of it can put other women at ease, make them inspire them to maybe do something very bold, like share an idea or disagree.
They do that?
They do that. I know. The nerve.
Oh my God.
But
do the men cry?
They do. They cry immediately after. No, I mean, but in all seriousness, like, what strategies, what advantages have you seen that are kind of exclusive to you as a woman in your line of work? Are there any? I mean, again, I those are kind of 2 examples, but.
Yeah, I think those are good examples, and I'm glad to hear that those women have those experiences. I think mine are different because of the kind of role I'm in. So as a consultant, usually what I'm doing is working with a small project team throughout the year to get a project done, and then at the end of that, I go in and might talk to an entire leadership team about what I found and maybe some recommendations. And often that leadership team is mostly male. I think when there are some females in the room, it's a 50-50 shot. It could be what we talked about earlier,
right,
where they're actually a little more difficult and a little snotty and have some baggage. Or they could be very supportive. I've had both. I will say I do feel more comfortable walking into a room when I see other women there. But as far as advantages, I think they're a little different because I'm not in sales so much, so I don't have quite the experience you suggested as far as pulling the woman card to get a meeting or something like that. I understand it, but it's not quite the role I'm in. But a big part of what I do is I try to understand an organization and the context in order to be able to make recommendations to leadership. And a big part of that is understanding the voice of the employees. And so I do things like a lot of interviews and focus groups, and I think I am much more approachable than a man twice my age. I think people inherently trust me more and feel comfortable talking to me. And I think part of that is because I walk in the door and I'm a younger woman, and so I'm just not as scary. Or also, I don't represent management. Often management is an old white guy. Right. And so I don't look like that. I look more like them. And so they feel more comfortable talking to me. And part of it is I think I'm empathetic, I'm good at listening, and so I get more from them. I've had focus groups where people cry or tell me just some really deep-seated stuff and leave feeling very therapeutic and they hadn't had an opportunity to do that before. And I will say that's not entirely my role. That's not the kind of psychology I do.
Right.
But often it's important to have these kinds of conversations to figure out the real problems in an organization, or if it's a toxic situation, to really kind of get to the root of it. And so part of being who I am is I'm able to get at that a little more than a man can.
Yeah, so that actually touches right on another thing that I really appreciate about you, and I think it's both your personality, but also you have a lot of education in this, so you know what the realities are about the differences between men and women. I think, in my personal opinion, for whatever that's worth, one of the more harmful aspects of modern feminism, this current movement, this version of feminism that we have now, is this idea that men and women are literally across the board equal in every single way and both should be treated in exactly the same way, when that's obviously not the case. They're not exactly different. I mean, from a civil rights and legal and mental perspective, sure. But of course, but it's undeniable that men tend to be physically stronger, and women tend to be more well-developed in fluency of traits like empathy, like you just said yourself. I mean, obviously, it's impossible to blanket statement. There's going to be women who are stronger than tons of men. There's plenty of those, and then there's going to be plenty of men who are very empathetic, and plenty of women who aren't. But again, there are these tendencies. A more than chance amount of times you see that those do fall into place in that way. So again, obviously, it's impossible to blanket statement an entire half of the human population. But from your perspective, what would you say are some of those, in addition to what you just mentioned, but what are some of those natural inherent advantages of being a woman in a male field? And how can any woman that's listening to this, how can they potentially set themselves up for greater success right off the bat by playing to the strengths that come along with simply being female?
It's a good question. It's a good setup. It's a really complex question too.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of what you started with is, from a civil rights and kind of mental perspective, of course we're all the same. And I think more than being the same, I think people combine value and traits, and everyone, regardless of any kind of trait, brings the same value. We're all human beings. We all deserve to be treated like respect, but we have different traits, whether it's because you're male or female or because of your age. We do have individual differences. And so I think we can acknowledge different kinds of traits without attaching value to them. And so I wanted to set that aside first.
Yeah.
Then as far as what can women kind of lean on, especially in a male-dominated field, I think listening is really important, and I think that's important for just one, how you do your work, no matter what you do. The more you can listen and understand your end user or your customer, you're going to be a lot better at your job. So whether your end user or customer is your job your boss or another department, or someone outside of the organization, listen to them. I think women are really good at building relationships instead of maybe naturally assuming that one project is like another. Take the time to listen to your customer and end user and anticipate their needs and build that relationship in a way that someone else might not. And whether that someone else is a man or anyone else, it's really just more about being intentional. That's something I talk a lot about in my work, is when you make a choice or you do work in a certain way, make sure it's intentional with your customer in mind, not a template or the way you used to do it. I think another is bringing people together. I think your value isn't always in your exact work output, but it's often in the kinds of relationships you can foster, whether that's in a sales environment or kind of product development kinds of collaboration. If you can build relationships that wouldn't naturally happen, that brings a lot of value. One example is in a client I worked with, they got the engineering guy to ride along with the sales guy for a couple of weeks. And that seemed like a huge waste of time to a lot of people. But by bringing these kinds of people together, the engineering guy was able to better understand what their customer needed, was able to build relationships with sales, and the sales guy started to understand the engineering person. They worked together a lot more closely, and you can see how that would lead to a lot of good outcomes. So I think it's a little bit about thinking broadly and beyond the exact piece of work in front of you.
Awesome. Cool. Yeah, I mean, I think I've seen that play out too, just in where I'm at, for sure. You brought up something interesting about listening too. I think this is something that anyone can work with, but maybe you're right, like especially men probably. I mean, I've gotten that feedback before, that I listen, but I also produce sometimes the answer during the listening and become too visibly eager to share the answer. So it's not that I'll interrupt, but it's more that like there's a way to sort of even create the image of active listening. So in terms of like solutions to that, one of the things that I thought of, and I'm just curious what your kind of feedback is on it, but would be to like let somebody finish and then wait 3 seconds to come up with an answer. So it looks like you're formulating the answer even if you already have the answer. Because if you're like, yes, I know, then people are going to think that like you're just kind of sitting there dying for them to finish, and you're not giving them a chance to totally speak everything that they want to say in case they think they're going to add something more important. Even if they do or don't, like you can create this image of better listening too. So for people who, whether male or female or regardless or whatever, like for something, a skill like listening or like empathy, what are some of the strategies that you would suggest to help develop that?
Yeah, and I think you're right, by the way. When you're visibly excited, and I know that comes from a good place of you have a lot of knowledge, you're really customer-oriented, you want to help, and totally. you know the answer, and you just want to jump in. But that can shut certain people down, especially if it is someone who is a little less confident or maybe new at what they're doing. Yep. They'll just say, oh, Ricky knows. I'm just going to let him talk. Yep. And so I think part of it, the 3-second rule you described, that's a great place to start. I think it does still assume that you are going to discuss the answer you've already come up with. Yeah. And so...
But you just look less like you had the answer.
But you're not listening more.
True. You're creating the
You're just being quiet
illusion,
for a minute.
You're creating the illusion of listening.
Right. Right. Which is a fair place to start, because at least that allows the person to finish what they're talking about, finish their thought, and know that you're considering them. Right. So step 1, fabulous. Sure. However,
super surface level step. Right.
It's an idea, Ricky.
It's putting makeup on
it's really pretty lipstick
on your listening skill.
Yep. What I would love to see is if you can maybe start, instead of by just immediately responding with your idea, asking more questions. Because even when you think you know the answer, or you have an answer that, let's say, could work and could be great, by asking a couple more questions, you might understand a little more nuance, a little more complexity, or even if not, just show them that you really care and are trying to really get to the bottom of whatever the issue is. So obviously you don't want to follow up every statement with 3 questions. But if you can find opportunities to ask questions where you normally wouldn't and to challenge them and yourself a little bit to dig below the surface, I think that's a great active listening technique. And even just kind of tell me more, or, I've looked at this before, but I'm curious if your case is different.
Right.
I think everyone loves to be different, by the way. Everyone likes to be understood, but not to be predictable.
Of course. Yeah, right? Of course.
Yeah. So, that applies in business too.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that speaks exactly to, you had said before, like, you want to be able to treat every single project as its own individual personality, and it has its own nuance, and odds are that it does. It might be very similar to another project or scenario or relationship that you've experienced before, but that's great advice. Asking a couple more questions some of the time to get into what is that exact nuance. Like, okay, on the surface, this is the same exact type of problem, and I have the solution that worked in the past, but maybe we need to make a small tweak to that solution for this particular problem because this particular problem is slightly different from the last one.
Right. And even if you end up in the same place you did last time, at least you know it is perfect and you know a little more about that client and you're just generally better able to serve them. And they know you care and they know it's important to you. Right.
Well, exactly. You kind of to my point about the 3-second rule, like at the very, very least, you've created the visual of like really thinking about and considering their specific needs a little more deeply. So at the very least, you've done that by asking those questions.
Yeah.
What would be your advice to other women who are maybe listening to this and they know that they want to pursue a career, they have a passion for something that is traditionally kind of male dominated, and what would your thoughts be there as far as like, is there anything that you would do differently? Is there anything that you wish somebody had told you, or just obviously you have many more years ahead of you to learn these things and develop this type of advice, but as it stands now, what would be your pointers?
So I'll start with, would I do anything differently? And I don't think I would. I think I knew what I was walking into. I mentioned earlier there was a professor I worked with on some research that's been a really significant mentor. And when I was applying to graduate school, I was applying to mostly master's programs. And she said, no, you have to get a PhD because with the kind of work you want to do, that's mostly men. And so it tends to be men with the PhDs lead the projects, and women with masters tend to be project managers and in a very different kind of role. You clearly want to be a consultant and kind of in a leadership role, so you have to get a PhD. And she was right. Very right, and I'm really glad I did it. And so from day one, I knew that was true. As far as pointers, a lot of it has to do with confidence. There are going to be men and women that are just assholes along the way, and you kind of have to expect that you will encounter them, but they don't define your experience, and they are a small part of what you are going to encounter in the workplace. So by having good confidence and sort of trust in your own skills, that's what keeps you going the other 95% of the time. And that's really broad. It's a lot easier said than done. And so I think part of that is you can't underestimate the value of a really good mentor. And I'll say that mentor can be male or female, but it's someone who sees you through a different lens than you see yourself and sees what you are capable of and can share that with you. There have been times when I didn't, it's not so much that I fell out of my depth, but I kind of wondered how I got to where I was. Or I literally said once, what was I doing in that room? I was helping with a presentation that's for a executive that anyone listening would recognize by name and is in the news constantly. And I was excited that I was there, but it was just something I said offhand, like, oh, what was I doing in there? It's crazy. And my boss stopped me and said, well, you were there because you belonged in there. And I really appreciated that. It was a really small thing, but he didn't want to let that go. He wanted to make sure that like that was really clear.
Right.
And so I think someone that will support you in those ways, it's the little ways like that.
Yeah.
And it's also the big ways of, having conversations to, help you, whether it's kind of your style, presenting to a room of men, or how to deal with weird sexist assholes.
Right.
You need that. And so I guess that's my first piece, is having a good mentor. And then I think another is to be open to the positive feedback as well. It's easier to notice when things go wrong, or when there is someone treating you poorly because you're a woman and you're young. And so you become hyper aware of those things, and you notice them faster. But then every time someone tells you you did a great job, or they're really glad you're there, you have to make sure that you stack those up as well. And that those really factor into the balance when you consider how things are going. So I read once by an author I really respect that they keep a folder of Atta girls. And so that's every time they got a really nice note from a client or their boss, they keep it in a folder so that when there's a really bad experience or just a crap day, they can look at that. And so I've started doing that. And surprisingly, it makes a huge difference. And sometimes just on a slow Monday, I look at it because it reminds me why I'm doing what I'm doing, that I'm where I'm supposed to be, and that it's worthwhile. And then I think there are small personal things you do to just boost your own confidence and help you keep going, whether it's, having like power songs, or talking to a friend after a bad day.
Eye of the tiger on the way to work.
Yeah. Whatever works for you.
Right.
Absolutely. I think you alluded to running, and we'll talk about it later. But one thing about my running is it makes me feel like a badass. And so when I run first thing in the morning, I come into my day a little more sort of fired up and ready to take things on. Or if I know I'm going to be presenting to a crowd of male law enforcement people who don't quite know if I should be there, if I put my headphones on with my power song on the way over, it does help.
Totally.
So the point is to take all of those things because you're going to need it.
And for the record, one of my favorite things to do is to downplay your running. That's in our little bit, our ongoing bit. One of my favorite things to do is talk about how much faster I would be than you, when in reality, 13 miles into a marathon, you run a faster mile than the fastest mile I've ever run in my life. Just for the record, I just want to throw that out there. That's one of my favorite jokes. It's nobody else laughs but me, but
I'll remind you of that later.
Thank you. Yes, we'll bring it back up in a minute. Something you talked about that was, I think, really key is you talked about confidence. I think that goes both ways. I'm curious what your thought is here, because maybe you haven't experienced this personally, but obviously I work in like I talk to marketers and media people all the time. Very female-dominated field. So as a male seller, oftentimes I'm going into this situation as the seller. I'm actually in the lower power position. Sure. So I see these power dynamics play out in all these different ways, where I'll see, like, especially if they're younger and newer, they will really lack confidence. Mm-hmm. And I have to be aware, like, this is part of the nuance of selling, is that I have to be aware of not crushing them, like building their confidence up.
Some confidence.
Exactly. I have to give them some confidence in that conversation. But the total opposite can happen too, where there's actually sexism, which I'm not trying to claim like this, the male sexism, like this is not,
I get it.
Men's rights movement kind of
like reverse discrimination.
No, right. But there is some of that. Like, I've definitely been in conversations with female marketing execs or people kind of middle management level, where they were like, you could tell that it wasn't totally just their personality. Like, they were being a certain way to me to try to claim as much control and power and twist my arm as much as possible. This happens sometimes with men too. Like, it can be that position. But point being, like, I feel sometimes like I see those dynamics play out, and sometimes I'll think to myself, like, I have to be understanding in this situation. I can't get upset. I have to be understanding, because it's possible that this is playing out because they feel the need to do that they have this leverage now, and that they had 10 years of a career where they felt like they had no leverage at all, and they were around men all the time who were constantly actually seriously downplaying their accomplishments and stuff, and maybe they are very, very bright and accomplished.
But that's not your fault.
No, but they feel the need to prove that. So that is a confidence thing, though, and I'm curious kind of what your input is on that going the other direction. I know that you haven't experienced that, but I think in my case, like, the confidence has been very important in those situations, whether it's a male or female, but definitely happens, I think, more that a female that I'm talking to goes like on the attack. And it's confidence that allows me to sort of keep my footing and sort of disarm the situation, I would say, turn it into something that's a little more level. I think it could go the other way, right? Like, if a female is getting pushed around by a male in that situation in some way, you just feel it. Like, you could just tell that there's a power struggle going on. Just having confidence alone might be enough to help disarm the situation and level the playing field out. What's your kind of take on that?
It's a lot of things from what you just said.
I know. And I could be speaking completely out of turn, so check me if I am. Like, that's, I'm just saying that in the 100+ pitches I've been in, that's I feel that from time to time.
Couple things. So the first is, I think that dynamic happens a lot in vendor relationships. And so I think I think in some of what I've been talking about too, it's amplified because people can say things to you as a vendor that they maybe couldn't say to their own employee, because you as a vendor are not going to run to their HR department and say they were really mean and they hurt my feelings. So that happens. Some people call it vendor abuse if it gets nasty, actually.
I've never had it like bad. It's just like I've had some situations.
That does escalate sometimes, and I have seen that, and I have seen it from women and men where they take things out on someone who's a vendor because they feel that they're paying that vendor money and it's not their employee.
I have the money. I control you.
You do what I want. Right.
Sure, but still, just having confidence alone, that's why I brought that up. That's what made me think of that, was like just having confidence alone, but what else is there to it?
Well, I don't think there's a lot of confidence there. In the very confident people I've met that are confident in their own abilities and in their career, they're not like that. They tend to be smart and interested in what you have to say. And even if they then share back a lot of their knowledge, it's not in a nasty way because they don't need to be nasty to you. They don't need your approval of the fact that they've made it.
So a little more, what about on the defensive side?
Yeah.
Right? You're the one that's getting, so it's already too late. Somebody's going heavy on you, and maybe there is a sexist, maybe there isn't, right? But I think a good amount of the time that there is something there. Like, even if it's only 10%, like, it could be that a male is trying to, assert dominance over a female who he feels like he'll get to push around and be in a power position. Or it could be the female who says, look, I'm the one with the money. I'm the one that's buying. So you do your dog and pony show for me now. You dance for me.
Yeah, exactly. And I agree that happens. And so I think in that place, I would try to recognize that is not real confidence coming from that person, that they actually have a need to be in a lot of power. And so however you can, without pandering, support them and support that they have a lot of knowledge and a lot to say. And I think this is where I would go back to asking good questions. So even if they are questions you know the answers to, people love to talk. And they love to talk about themselves. Totally. They love to talk about what they do. And they really love to talk about what they do well. And so if you can get them to talk about themselves and their role and how their role contributes, that is a way to make them feel more truly confident and put them in more of an appropriate power, because the kind of power when they're sort of being abusive or toxic is kind of a role power, that I'm in a higher role and you're paying me money so I get to boss you around. Right. But if you shift the power to be more of, you're an expert and you have a lot of knowledge, and so help me understand how I could help your organization. That is a power they have, and so if you connect them with that a little more, it becomes less about you.
But use it sparingly in a way that it's not pandering or...
Yeah. And don't ask stupid questions, like, because you also don't want to look unprepared or like you don't know what you're doing there.
You could probably play... Like, I know that you blank and blank, and I know that your business this and that, and I know your accomplishments this and that, but I'd love to hear more about, your position or whatever it is.
Yeah, and there's a way to ask really smart questions. I think that's something I learned to do early in grad school and in my career is even if you don't quite yet have something to say, but you need to get the other person talking, if you can ask a really smart question that gets them talking and sort of more attached to the appropriate power, it also shows that you're smart and you're thoughtful and you have good things to contribute to if you are asking this smart question.
Totally. I'm re-listening to, I like audiobooks, and I'm listening to How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie.
Yeah.
A seminal, everyone should read this book. Mm-hmm. The title sounds so Machiavellian, but it's the title, the whole point is to be sort of clickbaity and it is good stuff, and it's very basic. The reality is actually that it's got 50 different things that are so simple to do, but people really respond to it. And a lot of them you just mentioned, asking people about themselves. And I think they said something to the effect of there was some study that they recorded a bunch of phone conversations, and the most used word was landslide victory for the word I. The word I was used 3,200 times in 15 hours of phone conversations or something like that. So people do love to talk about themselves. And so, that is true. And another thing that I thought was interesting that can disarm those situations is to say that you might be wrong. To imply, don't use this, another thing to use sparingly, but to say look, I've been wrong before. I've been in this position before, but I've also been wrong before. So let me hear what your opinion, why do you think that I'm incorrect in this situation? Because you very well might be right. And if I am wrong, I would love to know that. I'd rather know that so that in the future and for this particular situation that I can do it the right way. So I'd love to hear, what your position is on that and suggest that, hey, I might be wrong. It's really hard to be mad at somebody or to keep raising your voice or to keep increasing the intensity or increase the pressure when somebody is doing something as disarming as saying, look, I don't know all the answers.
Yes.
I'm lucky if I'm right 51% of the time about things. Very lucky if I'm right that often. If I were right even that often, I would be a millionaire because I would be winning the stock market at that, So that's one strategy. I think that plays in. I just, wanted to kind of throw that out there and also get your thoughts. If I don't know if you've read that book or what, but.
I haven't, no. I've seen some articles attached to it and parts of it. I think a lot of what you said is right from my understanding, that it's a lot of things that are common sense that we know to be true, but until someone puts it in a cohesive list in front of you, it's hard to do.
Totally.
And so it's
smile.
Really great for that. It's eating the vegetables. You're supposed to, but until someone puts a picture in front of you, you don't really do it.
Right.
I do want to say with I might be wrong. I think the idea of it is really good, and used sparingly is great. For women specifically,
I knew
to
you were gonna
say
say
I
this.
might be wrong or I'm not really sure,
Yeah.
I think really starts to chip away at
I'm sorry, bud.
the I'm sorry's really drive me nuts, actually.
I knew you were going to say that.
I was just thinking.
Right.
It starts to chip away at your confidence,
Totally.
and it really makes you look like you're not sure.
It gives up your power,
It does. And so if you don't have to say, I might be wrong, but don't.
I think it was more presented as a strategy for avoiding a conflict that's clearly beginning.
Yes,
if it's going to become
clearly.
an argument,
And if you're already
an argument
in
is always lose-lose.
Yes.
So if you need to disarm it, be the first one to disarm it before it becomes a screaming match that's just,
100%. Yeah. I just wanted to take that opportunity to say that self-deprecating, I'm not really sure, I was just kind of thinking, I'm not that smart. Don't do that, because you are. And, women are at enough of a disadvantage of being taken seriously that if you provide people more reasons not to take you seriously, they'll take them. And that's the kind of thing that I am really conscious with myself not to do, even in kind of personal situations or just joking around, because it just creeps back into your vocabulary when you don't want it to.
Right.
So emails, too. I always reread mine to make sure I don't have something like that. Or if you're writing an email to say, I just wanted to say, well, just say it. You don't have to tell someone. So that goes back to kind of the being confident and just you know your stuff. I had someone tell me that once she said to not be quiet, to be a little louder and not worry about what people are thinking or to shroud what I'm trying to say. She told me actually that I know my shit and to be louder. And so I've tried to do that, and it goes better that way.
And I think I think you're right that that's especially true for women who might be sort of more pressured or more just coded to behave that way. But I think that goes both ways too. I've gotten that feedback as well before from my female manager who told me like, hey, you gotta, be confident that what you're saying is right because you know it. Like I haven't heard you be wrong yet, so don't go in there and just kind of like pussyfoot around about be steadfast. And I think that does it does claim your power. Like I say all the time, I think this is especially true for like a sales or a vendor relationship type of situation, but I think it's valuable for anyone to sometimes it's valuable to get into a little bit of a fight. Like not in a negative way, but in a way of like, I want to create a little bit of tension. Like the worst sales calls that I'm on are the ones where people just sit there and don't say anything. Yeah. I want you to ask me a question. I want you to doubt the thing I just told you so I can try to, not to sell you on it, but to get you to buy it from me. And I think that there's a difference there, and that can be translated to any, like your one-on-ones with your manager. There's some value in like, there's a strength that gets built up in tactfully giving each other feedback, even if it's not always good. To say like, I don't feel great about blah, 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 and I need to, to turn it into a bit of a tension situation can be valuable to claim some power when you do have to have the confidence. Otherwise you might crumple, but it can be valuable.
And I think it's about owning your perspective too, which I think as a young or early career person is hard to say, I have a perspective and it's valuable and so you should listen. But why would someone buy something from you or listen to your recommendations if you don't have a perspective? So yes, I agree with a lot of what you're saying. And I think some of it is owning that you have a unique perspective and you're going to share it and it's worthwhile. And some of that in what I do is often sharing things that are controversial or unexpected. And sometimes that's bad news. That's part of...
But it can grab attention.
It does. And so that's where... if I'm going to share some bad news or share something that's controversial, where I need to have every detail prepped and double-checked before I walk in that room because I know people will ask for it.
Yeah, totally. The flip side, we kind of started off here talking about advice for other women, and I think it's just as valuable to say, what kind of advice would you have for men who might be listening to this and maybe they don't necessarily know whether their words or actions are potentially offensive or implying certain beliefs or creating or instilling limiting beliefs in the women around them? Because I think this probably happens more than most men would like to admit. I think most guys they're decent guys and they have respect for the women around them and they love their moms and their sisters and their friends and their and their colleagues, and they have a lot of respect for them in a lot of ways. But at the same time, they could still be doing things that are creating that are coming off as offensive or as sexist, or maybe they don't recognize it, maybe they do, but nonetheless, either way, whether it's intentional or not, doesn't matter, right? It's being received that certain way. So, what would be your advice to men who could, how can guys go about fixing that, or at least being more conscious?
I really appreciate that you asked that question. I think not a lot of people do. So there's a variety of things, and I think. One place to start is to talk to the women you know and to ask that question and to sit with the answer and not respond to it and not respond with, well, that's not what I meant, because I'm going to go back to Dr. Phil here. Perception is reality. If you said something and it offended someone, it really doesn't matter why you said it. You offended them and it was wrong.
I actually have a podcast episode called The Only, perception is your reality, or something.
Oh, I'm so thrilled.
But it's exactly on that point, exactly to that point.
I struggle with that point a lot with my family members, actually, that everyone has positive intent, but you can still get very shrouded in different things with positive intent.
That way. Doesn't matter. They took it that way, so it is that way.
It's too late. Yep. So
you lose. You got to fix it. You lost the game. It didn't matter how you meant it.
Yeah.
It came off that way.
If you have to explain it, it wasn't the right thing to say.
You lost.
Yeah. You lost. You lose. Men 0, women 1. Game over.
Keeping score.
Drop mic.
Right.
All right. So beyond that, first talk to the women, understand their perspective, and be willing to kind of be educated on that. I think another thing is, if you're not sure if something you either said or did was offensive or not, think about if you would say it to a male colleague. And if you wouldn't, it was wrong. And I think a piece with that, too, is if you were considering it and thinking about it later, please just go apologize or talk to the woman. Chances are she noticed it right away. So you're not making yourself look like an ass by going back and apologizing later. You are one of the very few that would go apologize or address it or say that it wasn't your intention, blah, blah, blah. It will always be appreciated.
Even if she didn't notice it and she's like, oh, I didn't even take it that way. At least you got in front of it, right?
Yeah, and the fact that you were concerned about her feelings and how she might have taken it is a big thing.
And that can go anyway, too. That can be for, like, male to male
for
if
anyone.
You offend someone, but especially in that situation,
exactly.
for sure.
Yeah. I think people are just afraid to talk about it, but...
And to apologize.
Yeah.
To admit that, hey, I recognize that the thing I said this morning might have come off this way. Whether or not you took it that way doesn't matter. I realize that, or somebody told me that it might have come, like, I'm really sorry. I really didn't want it to come off that way. I hope that didn't hurt you.
Perfect. Yeah, exactly. And then I think past that, a lot of men think that if they aren't being sexist, that they're off the hook. And you're nodding, and that's okay. I'm not trying to pick on you.
I want to hear more.
Yeah, I'm not trying to pick on you here.
No. I'm very curious.
I think it goes a little further than that, because as long as there are a few men in the workplace that are sexist, women are going to face these issues.
I see what you're getting
at. And so, your responsibility is that if you see someone having a hard time, that you help them out. And so whether that is telling another man that whatever they said was inappropriate, whether it's later or even better in the moment, that's really important, because often women aren't able to do that. And they aren't able for different reasons, either because they're a vendor and just politically can't do that, or because
it's a social situation and they don't feel like they...
Or because they're more junior in the company and that person is above them, but maybe they're your peer, and so you can squash that and help them feel more safe at work.
I could definitely do a better job of that. I don't know how often I see those situations, but I definitely have a tendency to, like, ooh, there's something going on over there that I don't want to be a part of, so I'm just going to not. Like, it's so much safer to not speak up, but it is so valuable to speak up. So now I totally get what you're getting at.
Like, and to say, like, I'm not part of that. I'm not an ass like that guy.
If you see it happen and you don't do anything, you're an accomplice. Like,
exactly.
You're not, if there's a murder and you see it, you're not a murderer, but, like, you saw a murder and you just were like, oh, I'm just going to, like, you didn't do anything to try to.
Right. and I think, so that's, like, for blatant stuff that you see.
Totally.
And then I think there's another step beyond that, which is kind of what we were talking about earlier, that it can be really hard for women to have a voice or speak up, especially in a male-dominated area. And so if you see a woman struggling with that, it's not necessarily that anyone's being sexist, but help her. If she's trying to get in on a conversation and other people keep steamrolling over her and you see the confidence just whittling away, help her into the conversation or help her out later. It will mean a lot more than you think, and it takes probably 5 minutes, maybe even less out of your day.
Yeah, probably not even 5 minutes.
Yeah. And then I think just being supportive in general. I was talking about that law enforcement conference earlier and how there was a really awkward moment with the glasses. There was also a man that screamed really nasty things at me. But
awesome.
There were a lot of...
Great. So glad to hear that.
Thank you. There were also a lot of men that came up to me and said that I did a great job, and they're really glad they heard me talk, and thank you so much for what I do. And that meant so much more. And I still walk away saying that conference is, a huge part of what I did this year, and I'm really proud of it. And, had they just said, oh, she did a good job, she probably knows that, the negative experiences might have outweighed it.
Totally.
But because they took the time to come and talk to me and give me some positive feedback too.
You still see it as the best.
Exactly.
Yeah. That's so interesting. Yeah, I mean, I've heard people say stuff about, like, the brain has a tendency to just hang on the negative stuff. It's almost like you see, like, memes of it where it's like people could give you could hear 100 great things about yourself, and then the one person was like, you talk too much. And then there's like the meme of the person laying in bed and they're like just thinking about the you talk too much or something.
Yes,
like
yes, and then they're paralyzed for the rest of their life.
Oh no, I'm the worst.
Absolutely, absolutely.
For every one negative thing, that you need like 10 positive experiences to sort of counteract the weight of that. So that's great. That's awesome.
And I'll say that should come and can come from women too. In that same instance, I had someone pull me aside and just, tell me all these motivating, positive things about females and female leadership, and that carried me for weeks.
Yeah.
So anytime you have the opportunity to
bolster
help someone that needs a little bit, or whether you think they do or not, it means a lot.
Totally. Yeah, and I mean, like you said, it can go either way, right? Like, I think there's like, if you're looking at a male who is maybe the younger guy in the company and he doesn't feel confident to join in, like, help him join in. Like, that's going to mean a lot. Right. And that person might not necessarily have the confidence for whatever reason to do that, to muscle their way in. It can kind of go both ways.
It should. It totally absolutely should.
Yeah, it's just the good, mature thing to do. Mm-hmm. But it's kind of hard. It can be hard to recognize. You have to be cognizant of it. I think most people aren't a natural at identifying those.
Yeah, and I think until someone's brought it to your attention, you don't. Like, the coworker that sort of helped me at that party with the really terrible incident. He's a good guy, and I think generally does the right thing. But after he saw that happen, I think there were several instances where I got sort of passive-aggressive things where people would comment on what I'm eating, or there was one time that someone assumed he was doing the presentation instead of me, even though I was already standing at the front of the room, like pointing at the slides. They walked over to him in the corner of the room and handed him the microphone. And he was like super fast to say, well, Victoria's the blah, 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 and to, go a little further to kind of give me some credibility, and further than he had to, because he knew I was sensitive to that. And so little things like that.
But it might have taken some development. In addition to him just being a good, mature guy, maybe 10 years ago he wouldn't have known until seeing some of these things. It can take time and take away. One of the great things about doing this podcast, right? Now, anyone who's listening to this, it's been brought to your attention. You have the opportunity now.
10 years.
Exactly. Think about all the friends you're going to make now because of this podcast.
Yes.
Kind of seriously though. I think there's so much there, and I know that we could keep going on that forever. And I think we could do an entire other podcast on the running thing. And honestly, I feel like we should. But I want to touch on this. I want to touch on this now too, because as much as I before had implied, like my favorite thing to do is to downplay it and go, you only ran 15 miles for 26 miles straight, or whatever it was, right?
No, I'm a loser.
What a loser. Yeah, I love to joke about that, especially to make it a sexist thing, especially funny to me.
I'm glad you do that for yourself.
Thank you.
You take care of your needs.
I do, yes, thank you. It really helps my ego and my confidence to say that I'm so very powerful and male that I would race you up a hill. No, the reality is I would pull my quad 1/3 up the hill. But let's talk about that. Okay. So changing gears a little bit. Again, I honestly think we should do another episode if you're open to it. If people want to hear it, let's do another episode.
I get to talk about myself. I talked about how great that is.
But the fitness stuff, I think it helps people. Like, you're doing it at a high level. I want to talk about that because, and we actually just had a conversation 2 weeks ago about like the definition of an athlete, and that you had somebody kind of tell you that you're not an athlete because you only do one sport.
Yeah, he mansplained the heck out of me.
He mansplained you into space, But, I mean, it was such a dumb definition. Let's talk about that, too. But I think this is something that, let's come back to all the details. Let's not go into the details this time. Let's come back to the details in another day.
For sure.
And talk about the schedule that you run on, how you got started, and your diet and everything, because I know that all does play into your performance. But you are a very prolific distance runner. You have a goal, I think, this year of participating in each of the biggest marathon events in the world. There's 6 or 7 huge ones, right? So Boston, Berlin. There's going to be some traveling involved in there. You're not worried about that with your frequent flyer miles on your credit card. But you balance this training. The important thing, and the reason I want to bring this up in this episode, is that you balance this training and this competition with demanding work weeks, travel related to your business, publications. Your dissertation, I think, was some was participatory at the very least in a book that was released recently, right? So.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, huh, that happened.
What was that?
Like nonchalant.
Well, some men wrote the book.
Oh. You were just kind of one of the afterthoughts, right?
I'm joking.
Yeah, no.
Men did write the book.
Men did write the book, but that's
they really
completely
did write the book.
But seriously, I want to hear a little bit about your approach to time management and habit forming with that running. Obviously, again, no need to get into like the nitty gritty, but you are balancing a lot of this stuff with this running schedule. How are you fitting it into? Because I go to the gym like an hour a day, you know. And when I was training jiu-jitsu, I was going 2 hours a day. But like running takes however long running takes. If you're gonna run 13 miles, like there's no way to do 13 miles in 45 minutes, or I guess there is. You can run them in 3 minutes.
Well, not for me.
Not for anyone, really.
No. Well, actually, Nike has a big goal right now to train up some athletes to beat the 2-hour mark for a marathon, and so that's a little under an hour for a half.
What is that per mile?
4 something. It's people have a lot of doubts whether it's possible, but okay.
I don't know if I can bike a mile in 4 minutes.
There's probably something up there.
Yeah. So
3-minute miles.
someone will do it, and then we'll all say, we should have known. We should have worked harder. Okay, but I think the basic question is balancing it all. And with that, I think the first thing is, it didn't happen overnight. I didn't wake up one day and start running 70 miles a week.
Is that it? 70 miles a week?
Yeah, that's it.
Pathetic.
I know, you can probably run more miles.
I don't know if I drive 70 miles a week.
I actually probably don't.
I probably do, but driving takes a lot less cardio. I burn way fewer calories driving miles.
That's good.
So 70 miles a week. I think I run 70 miles a year.
And that's fine. Yeah.
Literally.
Yeah, that's great. But I've been running for over 10 years, and so it didn't start in the intensity I'm at. It started with a few days a week, a few miles each time, and then it was something I really loved, so it built from there. And I think the way that it works is you have to prioritize yourself. And I mentioned earlier that when I run in the morning, I feel like a badass for the rest of the day, and that's really important. So it becomes something that I prioritize, whether it means I have to wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning or I have to stay up later and run on a treadmill. To other people, that sounds like some kind of a chore or, you have to run. How do you make yourself? Well, I don't. I really need to, because that's something I do for myself. It's my only alone time most days. It's my quiet time, and it's also just, physical health too. So. Sure. It's not really a negotiable, and that means when I travel, I'm going to be running, and it's gotten to be something that's really fun to fit in wherever I go. It's kind of an adventure. So if I'm traveling to Ireland for a client, I get to run through the cute little town in a field with cows, and it's amazing, and it's a great way to see new cities. And when you make something a priority, you do find time for it.
So that is another podcast episode. That is no. I've seriously. I think we've already we've already written it up and everything. That's another episode that we've done where I think it was like don't use the phrase that I don't have time. You do have time. You're probably wasting time on other things. Like I do for sure, but you're just not making it a priority. And if you make it a priority, you'll enjoy it. You'll fit it in. You'll make it happen.
Exactly. If it's for you and not some kind of punishment. I think a lot of people look at running as a punishment because in other sports it's a punishment.
In PE, that's such a problem that they make that like, oh, you did the thing that you weren't supposed to do, so go run 2 laps.
Exactly.
And people are like, oh, I have to.
Don't make me.
I don't want to run 2 laps.
And so, maybe for other people listening, running isn't their thing, and that's fine. Yeah. But whatever health-related activity or workout that you find that you do love, that's something fun that, you should carve out time for yourself. And another thing you said is we do all waste time. I think all of us can wake up 30 minutes earlier if we really need to. We all watch TV or mess around on the computer. You can find 30 minutes to an hour most days of the week, I promise. Yeah. And it just has to be something you look forward to. And then you're willing to find those 30 minutes or an hour.
Totally. What's your stance on like turning it into a habit? How important is that? Because For me personally, I really love working. Like, so for example, we just had the holidays. So I'm not in my work schedule. Lots of holiday, minor holiday travel, lots of eating and things like that. I spent literally like 6 hours a day playing video games, and for like a week straight, didn't go to the gym. And somewhere around like the 4th or 5th day, I'm serious. Like, I'm saying this because I mean,
that's relatable. I think
it is,
that's
right.
a lot of
Everyone
people
does
are
this,
after
right?
the
Yeah,
holidays.
especially in the holidays. But
Yeah.
like, I think a lot of people just live their life this way. But so I want to bring it up because for me, the big problem is that normally I do it. It is the thing I do at 7 p.m. 4 days a week and once on the weekends whenever I feel like it. I just fit it in on the weekend. But when there's no schedule, I'm not at work, I don't have the 9 to 6 or whatever, and then all of a sudden my whole schedule falls apart. And I'm sitting there and I'm playing video games. I'm like, this is really fun. I'd rather play video games. I'd rather crack open a beer. I'd rather like lay in bed with my dogs and just play Xbox for 6 hours today, because getting up and going to work out is hard. And somewhere around the 4th or 5th day, I was up at 3 in the morning, which is kind of unusual for me. I'm a bit of a night owl, but up at 3 in the morning, and like really was not tired. I was like, why am I not tired?
You hadn't been working out.
Yeah, and I realized that like for me, I'd made it such a habit, like my body needs it. Like I go absolutely stir crazy if I don't exercise for about 3 or 4 days. Really, somewhere around the 4th day, my life literally falls apart. And I think a lot of people who don't exercise regularly don't even realize how much better they might feel if they just fit even 30 minutes a day or something like that and made it a habit. So for me personally, even though I love it and I literally like physiologically feel as though I need it, it will still fall apart on me if I don't do it at the same time every single day. So like you mentioned getting up and running in the morning, like do you have something like that, or is it just, you might just be so much more motivated than I am to run because you really love it? And like, I enjoy the gym, but you know, when I was training jiu-jitsu a lot, I couldn't wait to go. So maybe that's a difference. But again, everything I've done physically, it's been at the exact same time every day. Tennis in high school, jiu-jitsu in college, going to the gym now that I'm working, like the same exact time on the dot every day, or else I don't do it. That's just
right.
me.
I think that's a really important thing to say. That's you. And I think everyone needs to find what works for them. Personally, that wouldn't work for me, having a locked-in time that it's the same every day, because my schedule is really nutty and it changes really quickly. And then when I'm traveling, any schedule just goes out the window. But having the commitment to one time a day sticks. And so I think for me, it's more of a commitment to myself, to give myself that hour or longer a day that I can do what I need to. I think part of it too is a goal. I'm super goal oriented, so I usually have a race coming up. And so every day's workout is a piece of my training and preparation for that race. And so I kind of feel like I'm shortchanging myself if I skip that day. Almost to a fault. Yeah. I think on the days where I say, oh, should I really take a rest day? My coach says, yes. If you're asking, yes. Because I can become a little too locked into it and say, oh, but I have a race coming up and I have to be perfect. And then I overtrain and I get hurt. Or if I really have been running on no sleep, a night of sleep is going to be better than going to the gym late at night. And so it is finding what motivates you, whether it's a specific goal and getting a faster time or having a schedule. A lot of people do better when they have other people waiting for them and kind of a social thing. So if you had a friend that was waiting for you at the gym at 7 o'clock, you might be less likely to flake on them.
Yeah, totally. That's like my mom really doesn't like to work out on her own accord at all. I don't come from a family of athletes. But she likes to do like Zumba classes. Like she found some way to, like, now that she's starting to get a little older, she found some way to stay active, and
That's
like
perfect.
She won't go to the gym alone that consistent. Like she'll do it, but like it'll fall apart. Maybe a couple weeks in, or you know, it'll become less and less frequent. But if she's got, look, I'm paying for this 3 p.m. Zumba class, and it's 3 times a week, and I really like it. The instructor's a lot of fun, and the women that I'm there with, it's usually women, it's Zumba, but again, that's who she makes friends with. She's like, the women that I'm there with are really nice, and it's fun to socialize. Like it's kind of the only exercise and socializing that she has in a week, and that's what she finds works for her. For me personally, I don't like to talk to anybody while I'm working out. Like it's one of my favorite things about going to the gym alone and locking into my headphones, or like you running alone maybe. It is sort of one of your only chances to decompress sometimes. So definitely find what works for you. The competition thing is really interesting too. I find that when I was competing in jiu-jitsu, there was a huge difference in the improvements that I made and the enjoyment that I thus got out of it. Like, signing up for a competition, the second you sign up, your heart starts going. And like, especially for something like jiu-jitsu where it's like, it's a combat sport, but any competition, you're like, okay, I'm going to be kind of in the spotlight and like, I'm nervous and I have to prepare for this. But that fear is like, it's so valuable because those were the times where I would show up to the academy like 7, 8, 9 times a week, like twice a day, 3 of the days of the week, and every other day and Saturdays. And my only rest was Sunday. Probably could have rested more. But point being, like the level that I got 25% better in a month. Right. Every time I had a competition coming up in 4 or 8 weeks. And I see that with other people too. I see that with people who sign up for a run and they're like, well, look, it's only a 5K, but like I'm going to try to run it as fast as possible. I have a 5K coming up. I better not 2 weeks before the 5K just completely stop training. I'm gonna be sore, my knees are gonna hurt, and I'm gonna have a bad time, and I'm gonna be sad. The joy that you get out of like killing it is valuable too.
Exactly, and it's kind of a long-term goal to work at and progressively chip away at, which I think, after we get out of school, it can be hard to have those kinds of goals. So for me, it's important. It is a balance of it being the kind of goal and sort of pressure that you thrive under and don't crumble under. I've seen people fall apart a little bit because they take it a little too seriously.
Yeah.
But as long as you can kind of keep that balance and again, just find what's really happy and good for you, that's what it's about.
That is a beautiful place to, I think, wrap up this New Year's Eve. I mean, people are gonna hear this in a little bit, but New Year's Eve. It's a great time to think about your resolutions and stuff. So with that said, what are your parting words, if you have any? How would you kind of close this out? And again, I would love to have you back on, and we can talk a little bit more about just the fitness side of things. But
I'd love to.
For what we talked about today, what would you leave the audience with?
I think we've talked about a lot of problems and issues and kind of challenges, and the reality is a lot of things as you're progressing in your life and your career are really not easy, but they're worthwhile, and that's why we're working at it. But I think something we can all do is look around us and help other people. So whether it's helping another woman find her voice and be a little more confident, or helping a new runner sort of find their step and their training, that's something that takes 5 minutes that we can all do most days of the year.
Awesome. Beautiful. All right. Thank you so much for coming on. That was awesome. Everybody listening, thank you for tuning in. As always, feel free to share your thoughts, your praise, criticism. It all does serve to make the show better. Be sure also to check out the blog and any other content on thewealthyhealthy.co, and subscribe to whichever medium you prefer. All right, guys. Happy New Year and later.